Hi, I'm Dr. Brandy Bryson, Associate Professor in Leadership and Educational Studies and the Director of Inclusive Excellence at the Center for Academic Excellence here at App State.
And hi, everyone. I'm Krista Terry. I am also faculty in Leadership and Educational Studies, and I also work with the Center for Academic Excellence. I'm the Learning Design Specialist, so I work with a lot of online learning and professional development initiatives.
Thank you for joining us for today's session on strategies for student success, fostering community and sense of belonging in the online classroom. Our goals for today are to identify some strategies for building community in online classes, discuss strategies and approaches for developing teaching and social presence, and discuss ideas for fostering sense of belonging.
We felt like this was a very important topic for us to bring our areas of expertise and scholarship together on, because a lot of what we know and what we've learned about online courses is while they can provide access to students who might not otherwise have access to higher education, they also pose some challenges to supporting and helping students succeed. So when we can't see our students, when they're not sitting in front of us in a classroom, it poses some additional challenges that we as instructors need to think very differently about and think intentionally about to help our students stay motivated, to help them persist in our classes, and to help them achieve. So we are going to talk through some strategies for doing that today that are particular. This is an important topic, obviously, regardless of what modality you teach in, but some strategies that are particular to online courses. And one of the lenses that we can use to think about how we can approach student success in our online classes is through the lens of humanizing. So I'm going to pause just for a second to let everybody read this definition that I think is pretty powerful. So what this lens of humanizing does for us is gives us ways to think about how can we reach beyond or through the technology and through the medium to really create a human presence, a real sense of the fact that we are in a community together with other people, that we as instructors care about our students' success and are helping to nurture their success and their motivation in the class. And this is a lens an area, a strand in the research and the literature, Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and I have her URL down here, has spent a lot of time really thinking about and fleshing out research, some strategies around. So it's going to kind of form a lens or an overlay of some of the approaches that we talk about today, because ultimately this is what we're finding in the literature, is that the more that we can convey a sense of our humanness and bring that community together in our online classes, our students are much more likely to be motivated, satisfied with their learning, and achieve in the course.
One of the things that we want to talk about in terms of thinking about how we humanize online teaching, particularly now in the midst of teaching and learning in a pandemic, is pulling a little bit from the book of Trauma-Informed Pedagogy. And there are some links in these slides that will be shared that you all can have access to some resources. But if we think about the current COVID context, we're all a little bit having a traumatic experience in terms of where our brains are, in terms of our thinking. And if we look at the learning brain and we think about the spaces, this neofrontal cortex of the learning brain, this is where we're able to think rationally and logically. This is where our learning happens. And our cognitive processes happen, but the survival brain moves us down toward sort of the bottom of the brain stem. And so this is the part of the brain that gets activated when we are in kind of like a fight or flight situation, even if it's mild. And so with the current COVID context, our students are showing up and a lot of us are in survival. So it's our responsibility as instructors, as professors, to help create spaces that try to get students out of their survival brain and a little bit more into their learning brain so that they can be successful. We know that the effects of the current COVID context are causing stress or anxiety in a great number of our students, as well as disappointment and sadness, loneliness and isolation. And these are things that get activated and activate in that survival part of the brain rather than that learning part of the brain. We also know that students are facing financial setbacks, relocation challenges, and so this is creating space where students are really struggling. They may have a hard time engaging with our content as well as our materials, making decisions about learning, being motivated to study, being able to prioritize assignments and workflow, keeping track of changes in our classes. And again, this is not a function of being lazy or apathetic, but is a function of what is currently happening in the brains of our students given the current context. Importantly, from an inclusive excellence perspective, I'll also add that these factors play a role for our underrepresented students. Students of color who may be underrepresented in our classrooms, whether online or in person, who may not see themselves represented in our course materials, women in STEM and business fields, students with disabilities. Some of the situational factors that are present for them can also trigger a trauma-like experience even when we're not in COVID-19. And so it's important for us to think about these contexts as we're trying to serve our students for the purposes of academic success. We want them to be able to persevere and not give up in our classes. So it's important for us to create these learning environments for student success.
Fortunately, we do have some guidance from the online learning literature that is pretty well established. This community of inquiry model, as it's called, began in Canada, the University of Athabasca, a couple of decades ago when researchers there really started thinking about can we and how can we create a sense of community in our online classes, which at that point were mostly text-based. So they started asking some of the questions that we're still asking today around, how can we facilitate community in ways that we typically do in the face-to-face classroom? Can we really develop and cultivate those relationships that we value in the face-to-face classroom, and how do we do that? So while this model has evolved over the years, it's formed on kind of three core principles that they call presences. So social presence being the perception of other people as real in the environment. So getting to know your classmates, getting to know that you have real live humans in that class that you share goals, share aspirations with. Teaching presence, knowing that you have a facilitator, somebody who's in that course who cares about your success and is directing the experience for you. And then cognitive presence, so helping your learners construct meaning through reflection and discourse. So all of these presences, as you can see, overlap and address areas such as thinking about your class climate and thinking about how you support deeper levels of learning and discourse, and how you select content to make that happen. So this model really helps guide us in terms of thinking about that humanizing presence and how we can create a sense of community through these different kinds of presences in our online courses. So we're going to flesh that out a little bit as we go. And just a little bit of research more specifically on social presence. And this is an area that's really been honed in on recently as we've had different media that we can use. It's been well established, as you can see, back in the 90s, but continues to be researched. But social presence as the degree to which a person is perceived as a real person in the environment leads to higher student satisfaction and leads to increased actual and perceived learning. And even though this was established late 90s, early 2000s, as I said, the literature just keeps proliferating as we dig a little bit more deeply into strategies that we can use that leverage attributes of technologies that we have now and the evidence-based pedagogical practices that we have in the general pedagogical research base. So a lot really substantial in terms of thinking about how we can cultivate social presence in our online classes.
In addition to cultivating social presence for the purposes of creating community, we also want to think about a sense of belonging in the classroom and creating sense of belonging in the online platform. Sense of belonging is a positive classroom environment where students, all students, feel supported intellectually, academically, and to some extent socially, and are really extended a sense of belonging. So there's a responsibility there, and I'm learning more and more as I'm doing this work that creating this sense of belonging in this community for academic success is really a significant part of my role and responsibility as a professor, as an instructor. Dr. Terrell Strayhorn does a lot of work on sense of belonging research in general in terms of thinking about sense of belonging for college students, but he also has a specific emphasis on sense of belonging for underrepresented students and students of color in particular. And he says sense of belonging is at the most basic level whether or not students feel respected, valued, accepted, cared for, included, and that they matter. In the classroom, at college, or in their chosen career path. So we really hear this humanization component and the need for a sense of belonging that creates greater opportunities for learning, keeps students out of that survival brain and more in that learning and cognitive brain. So sense of belonging is incredibly important. So we're going to talk about strategies to create presence as well as sense of belonging in our online platforms.
And a lot of what we're talking about really stretches our thinking as instructors out of the cognitive domain of thinking about our course content to thinking a little bit more about the affective domain. So how are we nurturing places where our students feel emotionally connected to content through relevant activities and materials, through feeling like they're in class with other humans who they're sharing that experience with. So we're thinking, cognitive and non-cognitive as we go through these materials, because a lot of the research, as you can see, is really bearing through, like what Brandy said, when we can keep students in the learning brain and keep them happy and keep them satisfied in that experiences, that's when we really maximize their capacity to learn and to engage deeply with the material. So we have some different sets of strategies that we're going to dig into right now. We've kind of grouped them in a couple of different areas. We're going to start out with thinking a little bit about how to set the tone for your class. So the research in online learning, again, is pretty clear that we have a very small window to help students get in and get connected. So we lose students in online classes a lot more quickly than we tend to in face-to-face classes if they don't immediately feel connected to the environment and like they have a place and a sense of belonging within that environment, that we tend to lose them pretty quickly. So we want to talk about how we can really capture that experience for them in the first weeks of the class. And we'll also talk about how to diversify the curricula, and then talk about how to nurture some of the ongoing connections within the course.
We'll start with setting the tone in terms of the syllabus. I'd love to show the syllabus that was created by Dr. Kelly Hogan, who is a biology professor at UNC Chapel Hill. And you can think about the syllabus in terms of a traditional paper syllabus that would be uploaded to As You Learn via Word document or PDF, or you can even think about creating more of a digital syllabus within As You Learn or another digital platform. But the key pieces for me here in terms of thinking about sense of belonging and inclusion and equity issues is the way that she has really presented herself. So Dr. Hogan, has a picture of her here, which is a very humanized image in a syllabus. She says here that she takes special interest in students improving their skills. She talks about her office hours here. So she's denoting or signifying to students that she's open for students to come speak with her, to reach out to her, to troubleshoot problems, to try to build that relationship with her, or to try to get their needs addressed. Here in this bluish grayish box, she explains Biology 101, but explains it in a way that's a little bit more meaningful. So thinking about how biology can be more applied rather than just sort of the rote description of what a biology class is. Significantly, in this last sentence, she has in bold and italicized statement that says, we have evidence that every student can achieve if they are motivated to be an active learner. So here she's signifying to the students that they need to share responsibility with her to create motivation for learning in the classroom. She's also signifying to students, particularly underrepresented students. So again, if we think about women in STEM and business, students of color in predominantly white institutions, some of the research around these groups of students say that they can oftentimes suffer from what Dr. Claude Steele refers to as stereotype threat. So an uncertainty that they belong in this space, an uncertainty that they will succeed. But Dr. Hogan says, you're gonna make it, you're gonna do well if you are also motivated to learn. Another important piece that she does is she explains her office hours and names specific groups that she's willing to work with, which is almost every type of student. And this is really important for signifying a commitment to equity and a commitment to inclusion, and makes all students, but particularly underrepresented students who may have some gaps in achievement, feel welcome. And so this is a really important way of building community and creating a sense of belonging with meaning right from the beginning.
One of the things that I like to do right at the beginning of my class is use video so that they do have a sense, my students do have an opportunity to see faces and hear voices and see the other humans that they're in a class with right off the bat. I do that in a couple of different ways. I generally use Flipgrid, and this is an image of a Flipgrid grid, which is a video discussion format. I give them something to read, or excuse me, or a video to watch, and then I ask them to introduce themselves and respond to the question. So they get to use the Flipgrid platform to do a really quick, it's usually a minute and a half, introduction and response, and also respond to their peers. And as you can see, there's the main video of the person, but the little bubble up in the right-hand corner shows that either I or it looks like and one of their peers have responded to a lot of their questions. So again, right off the bat, this establishes this sense of social presence, like we're all in this together, we can see each other, we can hear each other, and begins to make those connections in a community way. I've also started using video postcards. So this is a way, again, to use video to kind of establish the human connection. And what these are just using your phone to record a quick 30 to 60-second video saying hi from a place where that's meaningful to you, or with your pet or with your kids, just to again be a human in the classroom. So this is an example of a quick video postcard I did when I was at a conference down in Florida last November, and shot it out to my students real quick during the semester to say, hi, I'm here, I'm at a conference, but I haven't forgotten about you. I actually just learned something that's really relevant to our class, and I wanted to share that with you. So again, just a quick little way to establish presence and that human connection within the class, and video is a great platform for that. Another practice that I use across the board in all my classes right now in the very first week of class is a quick survey. And this is a way to get information from my students, help me to know about them and their goals and their emotions and their struggles. And also it also gives them an opportunity to be heard and to say things that they would like to say to me related to the class. So I ask them name and pronouns. I ask them to talk to me about their course goals. So in some of my classes, I have students who are there because they have to be, not because they want to be. And they're also there for a variety of different reasons. So helping me, Having them articulate their goals helps me understand what they're there for, and therefore helps me understand how to make those relevant connections for them within the content as we go. I ask them what support they need as an online learner. And again, even if they don't have real concrete answers for this, it starts getting them thinking about what their needs are and how they like to function in an online class. And again, that's information that we share. I ask them about an emotion that captures their thoughts about the course. And again, this is good information for me, but it also helps them thinking about their feelings about being in the class. Um, so that they can make those connections as we go throughout the semester. Career goals are important as well. I have a working adult graduate student, so it helps me just kind of fit why they're in this class into their professional context, and I can make those connections. I've also asked them if they're procrastinators or planners, and I do this with conversation and with context, but when I put them in small groups, sometimes it's helpful. I found it's helpful to group them in ways where they have a common connection. And so this is a strategy I learned from a colleague that really works. It helps them think about how they prefer to work and how they can prefer to work together and how they can create some common goals around their work plans and their projects. And I found in doing this that my groups of procrastinators give me just as high quality work as my groups of planners do, but there's a lot less dissonance about who does what when. So this has been something that I've just started implementing lately in my classes. But basically all of these questions just help me get more information about their students, help them feel a little bit more validated and like they have a facilitator and instructor who cares about their success in the course, and they get to talk to me about what that means to them. And there are some very simple tools to do that. So the As You Learn questionnaire works well. I tend to use Google Forms, and Qualtrics is obviously a tool that's out there that could do this as well.
So if we think about this strategy of setting the tone through survey, and specifically thinking about the use of student names and pronouns, the research is pretty clear that using students' names creates a sense of community and a sense of belonging for students. And so this research project actually, they found that in a large biology lecture, 78% of the students reported they believed that the instructor knew their names, but in reality, the instructor only knew 54% of the students' names. However, the instructor did ask students to use name tents and to continue to use name tents, and the instructor was intentional about using their names. So this could be used in a Zoom synchronous platform session by having, students put their names, their affirming names under their image, under their video. And it can also be used in asynchronous ways, just making sure that the instructor is using students' names in documents or in emails or any other sort of communication that the instructor has. This is important for students because they feel more valued, then they become more invested in the course. They're more likely to ask for help and talk to the instructor. They were more likely to report that the instructor cared. This also built some community and improved the student-instructor relationship. The student-instructor relationship, according to the research, is incredibly important. We know in the K-12 sector, the student-teacher relationship is the most important factor for academic success. The research in post-secondary is not quite as clear on whether it's the most significant factor, but we do know that it is pretty significant in terms of contributing to academic success. So if use of student names is a really simple way to create that relationship and strengthen that relationship, that's really important. From an inclusive excellence perspective, it's important that we're not using names from Banner or from As You Learn, but instead asking students what names they use and letting them self-report their names. This can just address the nuances for students who might go by a middle name rather than a first name. But what it can also do is to help protect some of our trans students who are using a different name than their name assigned at birth. So it's just an easy strategy to ask students what names they are using. So in addition to setting the tone through the syllabus as a strategy to create community and sense of belonging, diversifying curricula is incredibly important. What we're seeing from the research is that when our curricula are not diverse and representative of a variety of different types and identities of people, underrepresented students can't see themselves represented in our classroom, in our content, in our materials. Thus, it's really difficult for them to see themselves represented in the discipline, in our fields of study. And as we think about recruitment of diverse students to our fields and our disciplines, because we know that the research says that diversity makes us smarter. Diversity makes us better, it makes us more creative and innovative. And so we do want to make sure that our fields and our disciplines and our curricula are diverse. So it's important for us to think about and go through to see who's represented in terms of our guest speakers, our guest lectures, our course materials, our readings, because that is significant for student success. What is up here on the screen is actually a project that Dr. Carol Babiak, one of our chemistry professors and members of the IE team, worked on with one of her students, Tiara Fuller, who graduated in 2019. And together they came up with this curriculum that really showcased diverse scientists in a variety of fields and the contributions that these diverse scientists made to the field. This created a significant impact on Tiara and many of her peers, and Dr. Carol Babiak is now using this in significant ways to keep her curriculum diversified. If we can't diversify our curriculum, for example, if we're in a field like astronomy and it looks a very specific way, lots of identities represented that we can't necessarily change, we can certainly think about not necessarily changing our content, but creating spaces where we're making our content relevant and applying our content to an increasingly diverse and global world. Students want to know how they're going to use our content in meaningful ways that apply to the world, not just sort of a rote memorization of the content. So one way to do that is through case studies. There are case study resource banks and hubs in a variety of disciplines that one can find. And these case studies really can contribute to creating more equitable and inclusive classroom spaces in a way where students not only feel represented, but students are able to think about, again, this application and relevance to the real world.
One of the ways that, moving on to thinking about ongoing connections, one of the ways that I do that in my asynchronous courses is to use a lot of video and video updates here and there. And using video is kind of a steep hill for me to climb. There are lots of reasons why I didn't want to do it, and it felt hard, and another thing that I wasn't ready to tackle, and all of that stuff. But once I did, I think this has made the biggest difference in my teaching, because I am able to pull up Screencast-O-Matic or VoiceThread really quickly and just capture either an artifact, something that I need to talk through, or just talk to my students from a real human perspective. And it really helps kind of mix the methods by which we're communicating. So they get to see me, they get to hear me, instead of endlessly reading emails and discussion forum posts. And it gives me an opportunity to do some just-in-time checking in. So this is just an example of the video that I shared with them after we did our pivot to online after spring break. I had sent them a quick survey. We had a blended synchronous asynchronous class, so I had sent them a quick survey email saying, this is happening. Here's a quick survey for you to let me know what your preferences are. So as I mentioned, I have graduate students, working adults who I know we're shifting to being at home with their kids and different work schedules and figuring that all out. So I really wanted to get a sense of whether it would be helpful for them to keep our Zoom meetings to give them structure, or whether they just needed a little bit more flexibility right now. So I heard back from them, and I updated the syllabus, and then I popped up a video, Screencast-O-Matic, and I talked to them and I showed them the syllabus, and I talked through all my changes in the syllabus. So the yellow highlights are everything that I had changed to accommodate our new schedule. And I talked, so it gave me a little bit of a extra level of transparency and a different way to communicate with them. And I was able to say, I understand, I'm figuring this all out too. So here's how we, as a community who are all in this together, can think about moving forward this semester. So using video throughout my semester to address things that come up has been something that I rely on heavily now in my classes. Another thing that I've learned over years of teaching online is that when you don't have access to walking into the classroom and seeing your students' faces and kind of gauging how they're doing based on that, or based on the one or two people who want to speak up and say, I'm struggling here, or I'm not sure about this, you have to be a little bit more intentional with seeking that information out. So I do kind of evaluation check-ins, again, to evaluate their progress, to evaluate how the class is going, to do a little bit of a formative assessment around how they're learning. And one of the strategies that I use to do that is called a 3-2-1 protocol. So I ask them to tell me 3 things that they have learned either thus far or this week or from the reading. I ask them to tell me 2 questions that they still have, or ask me two questions they still have, and then tell me 1 thing that they're enjoying about the class. So it's not comprehensive, but it does give me some insight into where they are in terms of their learning and in terms of their emotional connection to the class. So what's going well for them? Where might they still be stuck? And I can address that. So these kind of ongoing connections and check-ins are important in my classes as well. So this brings us back to kind of thinking about the community of inquiry model. So the social presence being some ways just to establish that we're all humans, we're all in this together, we are connected even though we don't see faces and hear voices as regularly as we do when we're sitting in a classroom together. We still do know that there are other people on the other ends of these discussion board posts or assignments or things that we're doing in the class together, and we can have that interpersonal connection and we can feel co-present in this learning space together. That we as teachers can make our presence known by helping to continually facilitate the class, talk about our goals, talk about our expectations, check in, and see how they're doing. So so they still know that there's a teacher who cares about their success, who is actively facilitating their success through the classroom, and that we're engaging them cognitively. And it's not just about checking the boxes on a quiz, it's about really creating those spaces where we can dive in cognitively and learn from each other in deeper ways. So this community of inquiry model, again, is foundational in my role as a teaching, someone who teaches online a lot, because it does give me ways to kind of think about how I can create that optimal community within the class to help support my students, even if I don't get to see them week by week.
So the bottom line here, I guess one of the big points that we want to drive home is that creating community and creating presence and fostering sense of belonging really is so crucial for students to be able to academically succeed in our courses. And while it is students' responsibility to develop some motivation, we have to set the tone for that. We have to set the tone for students to come and to show up, to be motivated to learn. And I love this quote: when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And so for me, I've come to think about myself as a facilitator of learning, who is also a gardener. And so instead of getting frustrated with my students, what I try to do now is to focus on ways that I'm creating community and sense of belonging or not, and being able to then have conversations with students where that is needed and necessary. But really, again, coming back to this notion of community and presence and sense of belonging as it relates to academic success for students. We've provided some additional resources here, some that are a little more broad and specific to inclusive excellence, and then some that get into sort of the nitty-gritty on how to use some of these tools that Krista presented for us today. So thank you for being in this space with us. If you have any questions, feel free to contact Krista Terry or Brandy Bryson, and we would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.